In this video, I'll be taking you through my process of installing the Viper GC mod chip into my Nintendo GameCube. This is following on from a previous video where I unsuccessfully installed a Xeno GC that I bought as a knockoff from China, and I suspect that may have been dead out of the box. So you can watch that video if you want. I'm sure the process is fine if that's the mod chip you want to install. But anyway, my cousin Michael saw that video and so nicely sent me a Viper GC, which is a much older but much more reliable and well-known mod chip. So thank you, Michael, I really appreciate it. The reason I'm doing this mod is so I can basically burn a Game Boy player boot disc since they're so expensive. So starting off with disassembly, you need to turn that GameCube upside down and remove 4 screws. These aren't standard run-of-the-mill Phillips screws that you might be used to though. These are actually Nintendo only screws, so you do need a special bit to remove them. And here's a bit of a close-up on what that bit looks like as well as the screw itself. Once those are out, you can turn the GameCube back the right way and the cover just comes off. From here, we can then remove a few more items. There is a panel on the back which just comes off, that's not held in by any screws. And the front controller port module thing, whatever you want to call it, this just clips off as well. However, there is a ribbon cable holding it in, so that will need to be removed as well, and do this delicately. From here we can remove the heatsinks. I think they're heatsinks from the top. These are just normal Phillips head screws, quite long ones though, but you don't need a special screwdriver to remove these. From here you can remove the fan module as well. These are just held in by 2 Phillips head screws. This does need to be removed before the rest of the screws though, because it is in the way. You don't actually need to disconnect it, it can safely sort of just hang on the side there, but be careful with it as you're moving the console around. And then from there's just a bunch of screws to be removed around the perimeter of the GameCube. This will take a while, but just make sure you get every one. I think there's about, 16 or so of them, I didn't actually count. Once all the screws are gone, you can simply just remove the disk drive from the rest of the GameCube, and this reveals the part of the GameCube where we will be installing the mod chip. Here is the wiring harness for the Viper GC. As you can see, there are 4 wires sticking out which will need to be soldered on, as well as a couple of plugs, but I will be going through individually where all these go. Even though this mod chip is over 10 years old, I was actually able to find the original instructions online. Here it takes you through the whole process basically, and for the different revisions of the GameCube. My one was either revision A or B, I can't quite remember, but it's on the bottom left there. And basically you need to solder 2 points together, and then there are the 4 points where the wires need to be soldered to. So I started off by joining those 2 points together, which wasn't very hard to do. The first wire I soldered was the yellow one, which is actually to an IC that is under the heatsink. You're actually supposed to remove this heatsink so you can properly solder the wire. However, I'm nothing short of lazy, and I just decided to solder directly to it because the IC does pop out a little bit there. I mean, I'm not the greatest with the soldering iron, and I nearly destroyed a diode on the board because I heated it up too much. However, if you do need to remove the heatsink, you do have to reapply the heatsink compound, and I just wasn't really into doing that. So I got lucky, the wire soldered okay, but if you're doing this yourself, then just choose carefully what you do. And then from there I soldered in the 3 other wires, and apologies for getting in the way as I was doing this, I wasn't really paying enough attention, but here is kind of a close-up shot of where all the wires go if you sort of visually want to see how it all went down. So at this point I decided to plug the wiring harness into the mod chip and just do a bit of a test just to make sure that it was all working properly, even without the disk drive connected. And yeah, luckily the Cobra interface booted up fine, so it looks like we're off to a good start. So from here I popped the disk drive back on and then dealt with the other wires. The one plug plugs into a socket which is on the actual disk drive itself, which acts as an override so the thing works when the disk drive is open. And the other is actually a socket where the original plug that usually goes into that main board plugs into. With everything all plugged in again, I decided to do another test and make sure the disk drive was still working with the mod chip. My legit version of Need for Speed worked flawlessly, so far so good again. With everything all working, I decided to put it all back together, and at this point it's just a case of routing the wires through so they don't get in the way of anything, namely the actual discs themselves. As you're putting the main case back on, just be mindful of the mod chip, just make sure that it's not blocking the reset switch, and also just make sure it's not sticking out too far so you can put the case back on in the first place. So to burn my Game Boy Player boot up disc, I'm actually using an original DVD-R Mini, which are kind of hard to find these days. I'm using the Maxwell brand here, but these are left over from a family video camera. The go-to program for this seems to be IMG Burn. I was using my original Windows XP computer to do this, however I later found out this wasn't necessary, and that the burning software worked fine on my modern computer. However, when I tried to play back the disc, it stopped spinning after a while and the GameCube refused to read it. So I then tried a full-size DVD-R, which are a lot more common and cheaper to buy these days, but sadly this would stop spinning a lot quicker and the GameCube wouldn't even realize that I had a disc in it at all. It turns out that the fix to this problem may be a potentiometer, which basically needs to be tweaked. Basically, the potentiometer needs to be lessened, I guess you could say, so there is less resistance, so there's more power going to the laser, so it's a lot stronger, and thus more easily read discs. So to get to this pot, we need to do more disassembly. Again, we need to take out all the screws and then remove the disk drive from the top of the GameCube. On the bottom of the DVD drive is a metal shield. This needs to be removed just by unscrewing 5 Phillip head screws. And here is the pot itself. Doing a bit of reading online, it seems that the general consensus for the best amount of resistance is 230 ohms. So using a multimeter, that's what we will be using. I've heard of some people just manually tweaking the potentiometer, but I do not recommend doing this because you could turn it down too low and the laser would receive too much power, which would then cause problems. So I would highly recommend using a multimeter. So I was expecting about 300 ohms, and to my surprise, I got over 600, which was a lot higher than I thought it would be. So I did a little bit of a tweak and came down to around the 400 ohm mark and put it back together to see if this would work. However, I was having problems, so I tweaked it down to the original 230 ohms that I was aiming for. And just like what everyone said online, 230 ohms was the golden number. The disc worked, so I grabbed my Game Boy player and clumsily installed it to test it on the bench. My first test game was a childhood favorite, and I got a blank screen, but it turns out this was just a bit of dust in the cartridge, so a bit of, I guess you could say, wind fixed this, and yeah, we were off and running. Fantastic. I still couldn't get my mini DVD to work though, and on closer inspection, it appears that it actually has disc rot, which probably explains that. So I had one other disc, and I attempted to burn again, and there was an error while burning. It couldn't verify for some reason. So I don't currently have any other mini DVD-Rs at the moment. I'll have to search around online and find them. They're actually kind of hard to find these days. So for now, the large DVD-Rs will just have to do. So the GameCube does look a bit dorky and naked just sitting there on the shelf with no case on, but it works, that's the important thing. And really, as I said at the start, the whole reason I did this mod was so I could burn a Game Boy Player boot disc. Finding the actual Game Boy Player itself was quite easy and quite cheap, but the boot disc goes for something like $80 online, and I just was not willing to play that. But 2 mod chips and a bunch of time later, I have my burnt DVD-R, and even though there is no case on it right now, the Game Boy Player works. So in the future, I will be able to do Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance reviews, because I now finally have a way to properly record the footage. But yeah, that's been my process. It's been a bit of a journey, I guess you could say, 2 mod chips later. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.